As the flight attendant made the head count, she noticed something weird. Instead of the occasional missing passenger, they had an extra. At first she thought it was a simple mistake, so she redid the count. And again, 82 passengers. She checked everyone for their tickets, and they all had them with them. Surely she was mistaken the first time she counted 81 passengers, but she called the air company just to be sure. To her surprise, they were positive there were only 81 passengers in that plane as she counted when they took off. The air company sent her a list of all 81 passengers and told her to match against the name on their tickets. As she walks through the narrow corridors, and a maze of food carts. Pausing, as she walks by the drink cart, looking down at the tiny bottles, she thought to herself, 7 years sober, but after this flight I may need a drink. She begins asking for tickets again. The passengers start to give her weird looks. A large man, who was sleeping, yells at her, "Why do you insist on walking me up for a third time? It's hard enough for me to fly without a company monkey, bugging the shit out of me." While back at the airport, the air company employee informs the authorities about an unauthorized passenger. To the air attendant's surprise, she only counts 81 passengers when taking their names. After looking in the bathrooms, she expected to see a couple trying to get a start on the Mile High Club. Last year a young boy and older woman was found in the bathroom. He had slipped and broke his neck. The attendants came running when they heard a woman screaming from the bathroom. The flight crew found the woman covered in blue dye. When he slipped, she went down like a rock as well, head first into the john. She looked up and down the plane, even below the passengers' chairs for the missing one. This raised even more eyebrows. For a moment she starts to question her own sanity. She starts to think about that drink. Did she miscount 3 times in a row? It's possible, she told herself. I am sure it happens all of the time. It couldn't be, but it was the only explanation. She informs the air company that it was a mistake and the passengers are allowed to disembark. As they leave the plane she counts them again, and to her astonishment there were without a shadow of a doubt 82 people. As she glances, confused, at the line of people leaving the plane, a man in a black wool trench coat looks back and smiles at her. She runs to catch up with him, pushing the other passengers out of the way as she does so, but the man has vanished. She tells her story to the authorities, but no footage of the man is seen on the cameras. Weeks go by, the company requests a medical check and drug test. All medical checks says she's okay, and she is told over and over that she was simply confused, until she convinces herself of it. But then, as she is coming back from the supermarket one night, she sees a man on a dark trench coat smiling at her below a faulty lamp. The light flickers, and crackles. Between each flicker she sees the man licking his lips, grinning back at her. She looks back to see if there's anyone around, but she is all alone. As she turns her head back, the man is gone. She panics and falls deeper into her artificially lit world. Drops her keys and runs to the nearest police station, but no one believes her story. As if they would, she had become obsessed with a man that no one could see. One of the older police women from behind the desk asked if she has been in any mental institutions in the past. She flips, and yells at the officers, pleading that she is perfectly sane, but being followed. They look at each other in disbelief, but concede to taking her home and tell her that they'll drop by later. They don't. As she lays in bed trying to sleep, she hears noises downstairs, footsteps. Maybe it was a mouse, she thought, as she held the pillow between her legs. Another sound, a soothing voice begins humming a song, jumping from her bed, and she runs to the phone. "Police, I need to call the police," she tells herself. Pressing the phone up to her ear she dials. A man comes out from behind the curtain, smiling at her. His long fingers reach over and grabs the phone line, pulling it out of the wall. She screams and cries, begging him not to hurt her. This is how women get raped, it will be over soon, she thought, but the man had no interest in touching her. The neighbors hear her screaming and call the police. The same officers who saw her before arrive at the scene and find a woman lying in a corner crying. They ask her what happened, but she doesn't answer. She just stares at the distance with a frightened look in her eyes. She said only one thing after that. He's a dark man, a clever man, he is coming with gifts for all. The police called the ambulance, they strapped her in thinking it had to be drugs or maybe she had started drinking again, but they couldn't find anything more than a bottle of aspirin. She spends her days in a wheelchair in the local mental institution, always looking behind her shoulder to see if the man in the dark coat is coming. In the same apartment building, a man was late for work. A butterfly was caught in a spider's web. He saw the spider stalking close to the butterfly, slashing the silver threads, releasing her into the air. He thought it was a nice thing to do. Good deeds are never forgotten, he told himself. The butterfly spread its wings and zipped along. As by some magic it flew up and up, until it had reached its destination. It flapped its wings with all its might as a small breeze grew larger and larger. The wind traveled over the forest, singing between the branches and fumbling between the leaves. An acorn dropped in front of a squirrel. The squirrel had planned on climbing down the tree to get the acorn, but instead reckoned he had enough nuts to sustain himself for the day. Off he scurried into his hole to wait out the winter. For he knew in his little squirrel mind, with the winter came bad things, and this winter he would live in his hole along. Because the squirrel scurried back to his hole, a hawk couldn't find anything to eat. The hawk circled the forest but found nothing. Eventually it settled on a sparrow. The sparrow dipped and dodged, but succumbed to the furious onslaught of hooks and talons. Now the sparrow was gone from this earth, her eggs were left all alone on a treetop. A greedy cat snuck up the tree, aware of the absent sentinel. The cat was pleased with his luck and, licking his lips, gobbled up the eggs, filling him quite thoroughly, thinking to himself, eggs today, maybe a squirrel tomorrow. Because he was so thoroughly filled, the cat was resting in the sunlight that streamed through his owner's window. He looked so peaceful and happy, his owner couldn't help but stop and play with him. With a shocked exclamation, the man hurried out the door, who was now late to his job, the job at the mental hospital. Because he was late for his job, he did not understand the large police and fire presence at his building, or rather, the building that once occupied the crater now sitting in the lot. After a few questions, the man learned that there had been a gas leak in his building that had ignited. Luckily no one had been inside the building. The man sat down and rubbed his head. He wanted to cry and laugh and faint all at once. For he lost everything, but the cat. As he sat dreaming, a butterfly landed on his shoulder and grazed its wings along his cheek. A man in a long black coat with a handsome grin sat down beside him. In a rusty New England accent he said as he put his left arm on the man's shoulder, "It's a wonderful day, is it not? That butterfly reminds me of a trip I just took, flying all over the world, unseen as the butterflies. You know, I once saw a swarm of butterflies over an open grave. They take more than the grave robbers ever could.